Well, there you are. Come on in.
Lorene Haskins was 74 the day her own children sat her down, smiled softly, and divided her life like she was already gone. Not after a funeral, not after a diagnosis, not after she had lost her mind. No, they did it while she was still sitting right there, hands folded in her lap, listening as her son explained why the house was no longer simple, why the savings had been reorganized, why the car made more sense with her daughter now. They never raised their voices. That was what made it so cold. Everything came wrapped in calm words, careful words, practical words, the kind people use when they want something ugly to sound reasonable. And somewhere between one explanation and the next, Lorene understood the truth. Her children were not helping her. They were clearing her out, piece by piece, paper by paper. They had taken everything they knew how to value. The house, the car, the money. And if they had understood her father even half as well as they thought they understood her, they would have looked harder at the one thing still sitting in her name, the old farm in western Kentucky. But they didn't. They missed it completely. And subscribe now, because what was waiting on that farm was bigger than land, and her children would not understand their mistake until it was too late. What stayed with Lorene later was not the folder itself. It was the care her children took with their voices, the care in the way Dana set down the glass of sweet tea without spilling a drop, the care in the way Mitch waited until she was seated before he opened the folder at all, as if manners could soften whatever had already been decided. Dana's dining room looked like the kind of room where nothing ugly should ever happen. Afternoon light fell clean across the table. The curtains were half open. A bowl of wrapped mints sat near the center beside a stack of mail, and a vase of grocery store flowers starting to brown at the edges. It was the sort of ordinary, decent-looking room that made a person lower her guard without realizing it. Lorene had come because Dana said they needed to go over a few things. Just a few things. That phrase bothered her now. Even before Mitch said another word, it sounded small, harmless. But there was nothing small in the way both of her children were watching her. Not nervous exactly, just prepared. Mitch rested his hand on the folder. Dana had a yellow legal pad beside her plate, with neat bullet points already written down. Lorene saw that, and something inside her tightened. Then Mitch began. He did not start with a question. He started with an update. He talked about simplification, about future ease, about avoiding confusion down the road. He used that careful, polished tone people use when they want to sound responsible enough that no one thinks to interrupt them. And because he sounded so calm, because Dana kept nodding as if everything being said was both sensible and overdue, Lorene sat there for the first minute trying to convince herself she must have misunderstood. Then he mentioned the house. Not home. The house. Something about title protection, paperwork, temporary adjustments. Lorene listened hard, trying to hold each sentence still long enough to make sense of it. But the more Mitch explained, the less it sounded temporary. Dana slipped in gentle phrases around the edges, saying this was only to make things easier, only to keep everything orderly, only to spare her from stress. Spare her. Lorene looked from one of them to the other. When was this done? Mitch answered too quickly. A little while ago. Not last week. Not yesterday. A little while ago. The room seemed to change shape after that. The sunlight was still there. The sweet tea was still sweating against the glass. But the air in front of her felt different now. Flatter somehow. Like she had walked into the middle of something that had been moving long before she arrived. Then came the account. Mitch did not say they had taken control of her savings. He said the money had been reorganized. Dana said protected. Mitch said structured. Lorene said nothing for a moment, because it took that long for the insult to become clear. Every dollar she had saved by doing without. Every bit of caution she had practiced through lean years and medical bills, and one season after another of never being fully safe, had been moved somewhere she could no longer touch without going through them first. Then Dana mentioned the car, said it only made sense, That was the moment Lorene stopped listening to the words and started hearing the truth underneath them. This was not a family discussion. This was an announcement. The house had already been handled. The savings had already been moved. The car had already been absorbed into somebody else's plan. And her children, sitting there in that bright, careful room, had expected her to take it quietly, because quiet was what she had always done best. Dana reached across then, shifting the papers so Mitch could find something deeper in the folder. For a second, only a second, one older document slid free from the stack. County stamp, creased corners, a faded heading at the top. Lorene's eyes caught it before Dana turned it face down. Reddick Farm. And just like that, beneath the shock, beneath the shame, beneath the cold understanding of what her children had done, another thought opened. If that paper was here, then there was still something they had not finished explaining. Lorene did not ask about the farm paper. Not there. Not with Mitch's hand still resting near the folder, and Dana watching her too closely, as if they were both waiting to see whether she would push back or fold. She had spent too many years reading rooms to waste that instinct now, so she sat still, let the silence stretch a beat longer than either of them liked. Then she reached for her tea, though her hand felt strangely light, and asked Mitch to repeat the part about the account. Not because she had missed it, because she wanted to hear how a son explained taking hold of his mother's savings without once calling it that. He did exactly what she expected. More careful words, more polished concern, more sentences built to sound responsible from a distance. Lorene listened, and something old and painful began lining up in her mind. Not just what they were doing now, why they believed they could. Her children had grown up in a house that worked because she worked. Bills got paid. Appointments got remembered. Meals showed up. School forms were signed on time. Christmas happened even in lean years. When Wade's back gave out for nearly a year, and he spent more time in a chair than on his feet, the house still moved like a house should. Lights stayed on. The mortgage got handled. The kids still had field trip money and clean clothes and something hot waiting when they came in from the cold. Nobody ever called that talent, least of all Lorene. She had called it getting through. That was the problem with doing hard things quietly for long enough. The people who benefit from them stop seeing the work. They start seeing only the result. A full pantry means the pantry fills itself. A stable home means the home was always stable. A mother who never drops anything important begins to look less like a person and more like the air in the room. Necessary, but unnoticed until something changes. Mitch had inherited Wade's certainty. Dana had inherited Lorene's softer face, but not, it seemed, her restraint. Somewhere along the way, both of them had learned the same dangerous lesson, that what their mother built would always hold, even if they pulled at it. Lorene looked at them now and could still see pieces of the children they had once been. Mitch at 10, pretending not to cry after splitting his lip on a fence rail. Dana at 14, sick on the bathroom floor while Lorene sat with a cool cloth and rubbed her back until dawn. There had been fevers, broken hearts, car trouble, tuition scares. One ugly winter when the heat went out and she boiled water just to warm the kitchen long enough to make supper. She had carried them through all of it, and because she carried it well, they had mistaken that for endlessness. Dana said something then, a small practiced sentence about wanting what was best. Lorene looked at her daughter's face, at the careful concern arranged there, and understood something she wished she didn't. This had not begun with greed. It had begun with entitlement, the steady, unexamined kind, the kind that grows in families where one person keeps absorbing the cost, and everyone else starts thinking that cost belongs to no one. Mitch closed the folder at last. The sound was soft, but to Lorene, it landed like a latch. And all the while, beneath the deed copies, beneath the account papers, beneath the calm little performance they had prepared for her, one thought kept pressing upward. Why had they brought the farm document at all? if they believed it meant nothing. Lorene did not get her answer that afternoon. Mitch walked her to the door. Dana told her to call if she needed anything. The folder stayed inside the house, the farm paper with it. And by the time Lorene stepped onto the front walk, the whole conversation already had that strange, polished feeling of something meant to leave no fingerprints. She drove home in silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses against the windshield and sits in the passenger seat and rides all the way back with you. Every red light felt longer than it should have. Every familiar street looked slightly altered, as if the town had shifted while she was inside Dana's dining room and had not bothered to tell her. When she pulled into her driveway, she stayed in the car with both hands resting on the wheel. The house looked the same. That was what hurt. The porch Wade had rebuilt one summer after a storm peeled half the old railing loose. The kitchen window she had paid to replace after years of telling herself the draft was manageable. The maple tree near the walk that dropped too many leaves every October and still made the yard feel like home. Nothing about it looked temporary. Nothing about it looked like something that had already begun slipping out of her hands. She went inside and stood in the quiet front room, purse still over her shoulder, looking at the shape of her own life, the Afghan folded across the armchair, the dish on the entry table where she kept her keys, Wade's old weather radio on the shelf, though it had not worked right in years. She had dusted around all of it on Tuesday, paid the electric bill on Wednesday, watered the mums on the porch that morning before Dana called. And now her own children were speaking about it all as if she were already halfway gone. Lorene set her purse down and went straight to the file drawer beside the desk in the den. If there was one thing age had sharpened in her, it was the instinct to look for paper when people started speaking too smoothly. The drawer stuck the way it always did in damp weather. She gave it a harder pull. Inside were warranties, church envelopes, tax receipts, insurance notices, old birthday cards she never quite threw away, and a thick manila folder with her father's name written on the tab in her own hand. Vernon Reddick Estate. She had not opened it in years. Not because she had forgotten it was there, because some things stayed easier when they were filed instead of felt. Lorene carried the folder to the kitchen table and sat down beneath the yellow light over the sink. Outside, evening had started to settle. The yard beyond the window was turning dim and flat. She opened the folder slowly, hearing the dry whisper of old paper, smelling that faint, dusty scent records get when they have waited a long time to matter. There it was, the farm, a deed copy, several county notices, a survey map with one corner torn, 2 envelopes she had never fully read because they arrived around the same time she was settling Wade's medical bills and burying herself in smaller emergencies. Back then, the farm had felt like one more tired piece of history asking for attention she did not have. Now, it felt different. Not valuable. Not yet. Just unfinished. She spread the papers out in front of her and read what she could before the language started turning stiff and legal. Parcel references, tax years, boundary descriptions, an old access note she did not fully understand. Her father's name, then hers, still hers. Lorene looked up from the papers and let that settle inside her. Still hers. The house might no longer be as secure as she believed. The account had already been moved beyond easy reach. The car was halfway spoken for. But the farm, the worn-out old place in western Kentucky nobody had respected enough to ask about twice, was still sitting there under her name, like a sentence no one had finished. And for the first time since leaving Dana's house, Lorene felt something besides hurt. It was not hope, not yet, just a thin, steady pull. The feeling that somewhere inside those papers, or on that land itself, there was a part of the story her children had missed. Then her eyes caught one line near the bottom of a county notice, and she went still. Delinquent taxes subject to review upon occupancy and access verification. Occupancy and access. Lorene read it again, then a third time, and just like that, the farm was no longer only a burden waiting at the edge of her life. It was a question. Lorene did not sleep much that night. Not because the house was loud. It was the opposite. The kind of silence that makes a clock sound rude. The refrigerator clicked on, clicked off, and somewhere in the wall behind the sink a pipe gave one small knock every so often, like the house was trying to remind her it was still there. She lay on her back, staring into the dark, hearing the line from the county notice over and over. Occupancy and access verification. It did not sound like much, but neither had reorganized, neither had simplified. She knew better now than to trust small words. By morning, she was at the kitchen table again before the coffee had finished dripping. The papers were exactly where she left them, spread beneath the yellow light in careful little rows, as if they had kept working on her while she slept. She took a pencil from the drawer, wrote 2 words on the back of an old electric bill: occupancy, access. Then she opened the torn survey map. The paper was brittle at the fold lines. One corner had come loose years ago and been tucked back in with the rest. It showed the property lines in faded black, and the road in thin red, and, running along the eastern edge, a narrow mark she first took for a ditch or old fence break. But the longer she studied it, the less it looked accidental. There was a notation there, not typed, written. Her father's hand was unmistakable, heavy, upright, spare. He wrote the way he lived, no ornament, no wasted movement. Lorene leaned closer. Use lane only if recorded line stands. She frowned. Use lane. Recorded line. It was not legal language exactly, more like the kind of instruction a careful man leaves for himself when he does not trust memory to do the job later. She reached for the second envelope she had never fully opened. Inside was a folded page from a small county office, older than the others, stamped twice and copied badly enough that some of the words had blurred. Still, one phrase showed clearly enough to make her sit straighter. Access easement under prior survey reference. Lorene let out a slow breath. She did not understand all of it, not fully, but she understood this much. If access had to be verified, and if an easement existed under an older survey, then the farm was not just a tax problem sitting in weeds. It had structure, maybe value, maybe protection, maybe trouble somebody had never sorted correctly. And suddenly, she was not thinking about the sagging roof first, or the overgrowth, or even the taxes. She was thinking about her father, about all the years Vernon had talked about that land like it was nothing but chores and bad timing, about how quickly he changed the subject whenever anyone asked what he planned to do with it, about the fact that he had never sold, never split, never let anybody persuade him out of it, even when money was tighter than it should have been. He had not loved explaining himself, but he had loved being prepared. Lorene turned the map over. At first, she saw nothing, just age spots in the paper, a smear near one fold, old pressure lines from writing on top of it years ago. Then she tilted it toward the light. Indented in the back, faint but real, were 3 words, pressed hard enough to leave a shadow. Check seed ledger. Lorene stared at them. The seed ledger was still out in the utility room somewhere, stacked with old extension bulletins and feed receipts she had not touched yet. And just like that, the farm stopped being a question on paper. It became a trail. Lorene found the seed ledger exactly where her father would have left it. Not filed neatly, not protected in a box, just resting beneath a stack of extension pamphlets in the utility room cabinet, wrapped in dust and old habit. The cover had once been green. Now it had gone dull and gray at the edges. Feed notes, planting dates, rain totals, seed counts. Her father had written in it for years in that same hard, upright hand that always looked as if it had been carved instead of written. At first, it seemed like more of the same. Corn, soybeans, late frost, dry spell, repair fence west side. Then, halfway through, the entries changed. Not in tone. Vernon Reddick was too disciplined for that, but in what he thought worth recording. The rows of seed and weather gave way to shorter notes. Stranger notes, things that had nothing to do with planting and everything to do with lines, routes, and names. Lane not theirs unless county resets line. Do not sign access talk without old map. Hardwood stand east side worth waiting on. People see poor ground and stop looking. Lorene sat down on the floor right there in the utility room. Her knees complained. She ignored them. The house around her felt different now. No warmer. no safer, but alive in a way it had not felt when the farm was only a burden. Her father had not left behind one big answer. He had left fragments, practical fragments, the kind a cautious man trusted more than speeches. She copied the notes onto the back of an envelope and drove into town before she could talk herself out of it. The county clerk's office sat beside the old brick courthouse, a building that always smelled faintly of paper, floor polish, and the kind of coffee that had been on the burner too long. Lorene had been inside plenty of times over the years, but never with this kind of purpose. She asked for parcel maps first, then older surveys tied to the Reddick property, if any still existed. The young woman behind the counter looked polite and blank in that practiced government way. She disappeared into the back and returned with copies that only half matched what Lorene already had. Different dates, different markings. One access lane clearer on one sheet, nearly invisible on another. Lorene spread the papers across the side counter, trying to line them up. "That one's backward," a voice said. She turned. The man standing 2 feet away was somewhere past 60, broad through the shoulders, cap in one hand, reading glasses low on his nose. Lorene recognized him after a second. Ellis Boone. He had done fence work for 3 farms out her father's way years ago. He used to speak to Vernon outside the hardware store in Dawson on Saturdays, the two of them standing like men who trusted silence more than conversation. Ellis nodded toward the map. "You're reading the road as the boundary," he said. "That road shifted years ago. Line didn't." Lorene looked back down, and just like that, the whole page changed shape. The narrow eastern strip she had been treating like a useless edge suddenly looked like something else entirely. Not extra land, not dead land. Leverage. Ellis studied the papers without crowding her. Then his eyes moved to the property name at the top. "Didn't think anybody was still fooling with Vernon's place," he said. Lorene folded the copy once. Slowly. "Well," she said, "looks like somebody should have been." Ellis gave the smallest nod, then tapped one yellowed survey with a rough finger. "If that old line still stands," he said, "your father left behind more than a farm." And before Lorene could ask what he meant, he reached for his glasses, looked again at the map, and his expression changed. Ellis did not speak right away. That was the first thing Lorene noticed. A man like him, if he thought something was simple, usually said it plain. But now he kept looking at the old survey in silence, one thumb pressed against the bottom corner, jaw set, eyes moving once from the eastern strip to the county road, then back again. "What is it?" Lorene asked. Ellis lowered the paper. "Your father was not protecting a ragged little edge of ground," he said. "He was protecting how that ground gets used." Lorene felt that sentence settle in her before she fully understood it. Ellis asked the clerk for one more file, an older reference tied to a prior survey revision. The young woman disappeared again and came back with a thinner folder, one of those county folders that looked too plain to matter. Ellis opened it on the side counter. Inside were copied pages, a stamped correction, and one handwritten note clipped to the back. He did not hand it over immediately. Instead, he read it once, then glanced at Lorene. "Your father argued this line 30 years ago," he said quietly. "Looks like the county never changed ownership, just the road alignment. Folks around here probably started assuming the lane belonged with the neighboring parcel because that's what made visual sense." Visual sensa. Lorene almost laughed at that, though nothing about the moment was funny. That was how her children had treated her life too. Not by truth, by what looked easiest from the outside. Ellis turned the file so she could see it. The correction showed what Vernon had been trying to preserve. The eastern access lane was tied to the Reddick parcel by recorded easement and old survey reference. Not decorative, not incidental, legal access. And the hardwood stand mentioned in the seed ledger sat beyond it. Lorene looked from one page to the next, feeling the shape of the farm change inside her mind. Until that moment, she had thought of the land the way everyone else had. A tired house, overgrowth, tax trouble, a neglected place with too much history and not enough reason. Now she saw something else. A property people had misread because they stopped at appearances. Ellis tapped the lower half of the survey again. "If that lane stays tied to your parcel," he said. "The east timber is usable without asking a neighbor for permission. That changes things." "How much?" He gave one shoulder a small lift, enough that no smart man would ignore it. Lorene went still. No smart man. Then why had Mitch ignored it? Why had Dana? Why had they touched everything else and left this behind like a burden with weeds around it? Because they had seen the broken porch, the county notices, the unpaid taxes, and decided that told the whole story. Because they did not know Vernon, because they did not know land, or maybe because they had stopped believing anything tied to their mother could hold value unless it came in a bank envelope. Ellis asked if she had any more papers at home. "Boxes," Lorene said. "Drawers. Whatever he left in cabinets." "Then you need to go through all of it," he said. "Not just the obvious things. Men like your father didn't always keep important papers where important papers belonged." That sounded exactly like Vernon. Important things, in his hands, were often hidden inside ordinary things. Notes in feed ledgers, receipts folded into manuals, measurements written on the back of seed invoices because the nearest real paper was too far away. Lorene gathered the copies slowly, more carefully than before. Outside, the afternoon had turned cooler. A breeze moved dead leaves across the courthouse steps. Ellis walked beside her as far as the sidewalk. "If you find timber correspondence," he said, "or old offers, don't throw any of it aside. And if there's a lawyer's name in those papers, pay attention to it." Lorene nodded. Then Ellis added one more thing. "Your father made people think that place wasn't worth the trouble," he said. "Men don't do that for no reason." Lorene drove home with the windows cracked and the survey pages flat on the passenger seat, held down by her purse so they would not slide. She did not stop for groceries, did not answer the 2 missed calls from Dana blinking on the dash. She went straight to the utility room, pulled open the lower cabinet beneath the workbench, and found, pushed all the way to the back behind paint cans and a broken lantern, 3 old file folders wrapped in faded feed sack twine. One of them had Vernon's handwriting across the front. "Do not file with taxes." Lorene stood there for a moment, one hand still on the cabinet door, staring at the words her father had written across the folder. "Do not file with taxes." That alone told her 2 things. First, Vernon had known exactly what would happen if those papers got mixed in with the ordinary mess of county notices and payment slips. They would disappear into routine, be skimmed, misread, forgotten. Second, whatever sat inside that folder mattered enough to separate. She carried all 3 bundles to the kitchen table, cut the feed twine with her old paring knife, and opened the marked one first. Inside were copies of letters, survey notes, a yellowing legal pad sheet in Vernon's hand, and 2 typed pages from a law office in Dawson dated more than 20 years apart. The first page made little sense on first reading. Boundary language, access reference, easement continuity. But the second page hit harder. It was a letter from an attorney advising Vernon not to sign any timber use agreement until the eastern access question had been reconfirmed under the prior survey line. Lorene read that sentence twice. Then she found the next piece. A folded offer. Never accepted. From a regional hardwood buyer. Not a fortune, not miracle money, but enough to tell the truth plainly. The east side of the property had value, real value, enough that somebody had pursued it, enough that Vernon had refused to move without the line issue settled first. Lorene sat back slowly. For years, everybody in the family had spoken about the farm as if it were one long apology for bad luck. Old land, tired house, trouble stacked on trouble. But her father had been protecting a practical advantage all along, and doing it so quietly that even she had mistaken caution for indifference. By 10 the next morning she was sitting across from a title attorney in Dawson. His office was upstairs over a storefront that sold work boots and animal feed. The carpet was worn thin in the middle. The waiting chairs were older than some marriages. The receptionist handed Lorene a clipboard and called her Miss Haskins, in the respectful tone small-town offices saved for women they did not intend to patronize. The attorney's name was Calvin Hodge. He looked like a man who had spent 30 years listening to people explain things badly and had developed no patience for drama as a result. He read the first survey in silence. then the second. Then Vernon's notes. Then the old letter from the Dawson firm. His face changed only once, and very slightly. But Lorene caught it. He stopped, reading casually. That was when her own breathing changed. Mr. Hodge set one page on top of the others and leaned back. "Your father was careful," he said. Lorene waited. He tapped the edge of the survey stack. "Careful enough to leave you something people could misunderstand if they only looked from the road. But this," he lifted the older correction page, "this is stronger than appearance." "How strong?" Lorene asked. He gave her a long look before answering. Measuring her, perhaps, or deciding how plainly to speak. "Strong enough that the land has more usable value than your family likely realized. Strong enough that, if the easement continuity holds under review, the eastern section is not landlocked in the practical sense people probably assumed. And strong enough that your father seems to have taken steps to keep this parcel separate for a reason." Lorene felt the room go quiet around those words. Separate for a reason. Not forgotten. Not accidental. Not worthless. Mr. Hodge folded his hands. "I'd like to run a full title review," he said. "And if I were you, I would not discuss this with anyone until I do." Lorene nodded once. "Then," he added, "more carefully than before, especially not with anyone who thought the farm didn't matter." And for the first time since Dana's dining room, Lorene felt it clearly. Not hope, not yet, but footing. Lorene did not move right away. She stood at the sink, one hand resting on the chipped edge of the counter, watching that truck through the window, as if looking too quickly might somehow make it disappear. It sat near the far end of the eastern lane, dark against the pale afternoon, angled just enough to suggest the driver had not simply pulled over to check a tire or answer a call. Whoever it was, they were looking, not at the road, at the property. Lorene stayed where she was until the truck finally rolled forward and disappeared beyond the dip. Only then did she let herself breathe fully. That was the danger of learning something important. The truth never stayed private for long. She went back to the table and drew a line through the middle of her legal pad. On one side she wrote, "What must be protected?" On the other, "What must be done first?" No panic, no guessing, no wasted motion. She had spent too many years solving life in the wrong order, putting out flames before checking where the gas was coming from, patching holes while people kept making new ones. She would not do that here. Not now. Not with something her father had guarded this carefully. Under the first column, she wrote, "Survey papers, attorney letters, tax file, Vernon's notes, any timber offers." Under the second, "Call Hodge Monday. Confirm full title review. Pull tax payoff amount. Check pump and roof. Lock file box." That last one mattered more than it should have, because until that week, Lorene had still been living like a woman who believed if she kept things neat enough, honest enough, visible enough, the people around her would treat them honestly too. Now she knew better. She found an old metal cash box in the hall closet. Wade used to keep spare fuses in it, and once, for a whole year, the emergency grocery money he swore he never touched. Lorene emptied the dust and screws into a coffee can, wiped the box clean, and carried every important paper into the bedroom. Not the kitchen drawer. Not the desk. Not the shelf where visitors could glance and ask questions with innocent faces. Under the bed. For now. Temporary. But deliberate. Outside, the wind picked up. A limb scraped once against the side of the house. Lorene went back out with her pad and walked the property again. Slower this time. The porch could wait. The back room roof could not. The pump housing needed attention before a freeze made everything worse. The eastern lane mattered, but not because it looked impressive. That was the lesson pressing harder into place now. The important things on that farm did not announce themselves. You had to know where to look and why. By dusk, her list had grown longer, but cleaner. She called a local roofer and left a message, wrote down the pump serial number, pulled 3 years of county tax notices into order, set aside one envelope addressed to Vernon that she had not yet opened because the return address matched the law office in Dawson. She almost opened it then. Almost, but not yet. There was a shape forming now. and she did not want to rush the next piece just because the silence in the house felt heavy. She made herself eat something simple. Toast, eggs, coffee reheated too many times. The kind of meal a person makes when life is turned practical and there is no one else to impress. When the phone rang again after dark, she did not jump this time. Mitch. Lorene let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then turned the sound off completely and placed the phone face down on the table. No explanations tonight. No careful listening to his voice while he tried to find out how much she knew. She carried the unopened law office envelope into the bedroom instead, sat on the edge of the mattress, and slid one finger beneath the flap. Inside was a single folded page. At the top, in crisp type, was Vernon's name. And, halfway down, one phrase jumped out so hard it made her sit up straighter. Do not permit informal access under any family assumption. Lorene did not sleep with that letter in the bedroom. She carried it back to the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, and read it twice through before midnight. The language was formal, dry in places, precise all the way through, but the meaning beneath it was not dry at all. Years earlier, Vernon had made one thing unmistakably clear to the law office in Dawson. No neighboring use, no family convenience, no casual understanding, and no everybody knows arrangement was to be treated as ownership where that eastern lane was concerned. Not by habit, not by assumption, not by pressure. Lorene sat with the paper in both hands and stared at the line that mattered most. Do not permit informal access under any family assumption. Family. That word changed the room. Until then, she had been thinking mostly about the county, the survey, the lane, the timber value, the shape of the land itself. Now, another possibility rose up from the page, colder than the rest. Her father had not only been thinking about outsiders, he had been thinking about people close enough to speak, as if closeness gave them a right. Lorene folded the letter very carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then she opened her pad and wrote a new line beneath the others. Why would Vernon include family? She sat with that question for a long time, not because she already had an answer, because she was beginning to understand that whatever had been protected on that farm was never just about dirt, trees, and tax lines. It was about pressure, about what happens when people stop respecting the difference between access and claim, between familiarity and right. By morning, the uneasy feeling from the parked truck had not lifted, it had sharpened. Lorene moved through the day with more intention than usual. She called Mr. Hodge's office just after 9. The receptionist told her the title review was underway but not finished. Mr. Hodge wanted copies of the newer county notices and any additional letters she had uncovered. Lorene said she would bring them by in person. She did not mention the truck. Not yet. Then she called the roofer back and scheduled an inspection for Thursday morning. The pump man said he could come Friday if the line held. Lorene wrote everything down. Times, names, numbers. She was building order now. An order had a sound to it. Pencil on paper. Pages clipped together. Receipts set in straight stacks. It did not look dramatic, but it felt like movement. Just after noon, the phone rang again. Dana. Lorene let it ring 3 times before answering. Hi, Mama. Dana's voice was softer than usual. Not weak, just careful. Lorene had known that tone her whole life. It was the tone Dana used when she wanted to enter a room without disturbing what was already inside it. Dana. A pause. We haven't talked. Lorene looked out the window as she answered. The eastern side of the property lay still under a flat gray sky. Brush. Trees. That narrow lane most people would think meant nothing. No, she said. We haven't. Dana exhaled. Quiet enough that another person might have missed it. Mitch says you've been going through a lot of papers. There it was. Not how are you. Not do you need anything. Papers. Lorene kept her voice even. I've been going through what belongs to me. Dana was silent for a beat too long. Then she said, Mama, I just don't want people taking advantage of you right now. You're out there by yourself. You've got all this county stuff, old records, taxes, and when things get complicated, it helps to let somebody else look at them too. Lorene almost smiled. There it was again, the same old arrangement. Only repackaged. Not force, concern, not theft, help. She set the pencil down. I've got someone looking at them. The silence on Dana's end changed shape. Who? That one word told Lorene more than the rest of the conversation had. Not good. Not that's a relief. Who? A lawyer in Dawson, Lorene said. Dana did not speak for a moment. When she did, her voice came out smaller, but tighter. Mitch is going to want to know that. Lorene turned from the window. Then maybe Mitch should ask himself why. Dana tried once more after that. Spoke about timing, pressure, stress. The danger of strangers telling people what they wanted to hear. Lorene let her finish. Then she said she had work to do and ended the call before Dana could smooth the edges back over. She stood with the phone in her hand for a few seconds after, not shaking, not crying, just listening to the new quiet. This time, it felt different from the silence that followed Dana's dining room. This one had shape. By late afternoon, Lorene had the papers boxed for Dawson. The legal letters, the survey copies, Vernon's note from the map, the new envelope, the tax stack. Everything but the originals she wanted kept under the bed. She closed the box, taped it once across the top, and wrote in black marker, "Do not leave in truck." Then she carried it to the front room and set it beside the door. That was when she heard the sound outside. Not a truck this time. A car door. Lorene froze. Then came footsteps on the porch, slow and certain, followed by one knock at the front door, and then another. When she moved closer to the window and looked through the curtain, she saw Mitch standing there, with his hands in his coat pockets, staring straight at the house. Lorene did not open the door right away. She stood just beyond the curtain, one hand still holding the edge of the fabric, and watched her son through the narrow gap in the glass. Mitch had his weight set back on one heel the way he always did when he wanted to look patient while feeling anything but. He was dressed for town, not for the farm. Good coat, clean boots, no mud above the sole. He had not come to help with anything. He had come to measure. Lorene opened the door only after she had slowed her breathing. Mitch. Mom. He looked past her, before he looked at her. Quick, instinctive, taking in the front room, the boxed papers by the wall, the coat on the chair, the signs of movement. His eyes came back to her face with that same smooth concern he had worn at Dana's table. I was in the area, he said. That was a lie so thin it barely deserved the word. Lorene stepped aside just enough to keep the door from looking hostile, not enough to invite him into the house. What do you need? Mitch glanced past her again. Dana had done that too. It was strange, the way both of her children looked at a space once it stopped feeling available to them. The room itself had not changed, but now every object inside it seemed to ask a question they did not like. I've been worried, he said. Lorene said nothing. Mitch let the silence fill in around him for a second, then took the next step. Dana says you've got a lawyer involved. There it was. No hello long enough to count. No real question about how she was managing. Straight to the one thing that threatened him. Lorene folded her arms lightly across herself. Not defensive, simply settled. I've got papers to understand. You could have brought them to me. Lorene almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he still thought this could be said with a straight face. You had your chance to explain papers to me, she said. You used it to move things. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair. The word sat between them like something borrowed from another conversation. Mitch took one step closer to the threshold, not crossing it, pressing against it. Mom, I'm trying to keep this from turning into something bigger than it needs to be. The sentence landed harder than he intended. Lorene heard it clearly. Bigger, which meant he already knew enough to be uneasy. Maybe Dana had told him more than she meant to. Maybe someone at the clerk's office had mentioned her name. Maybe he had made calls of his own and liked the answers less each time. She kept her face still. What exactly do you think this is turning into? Mitch looked away then, only for a moment, toward the eastern side of the property. When he looked back, the patient tone had thinned. You're alone out here. You've got old paperwork, tax problems, land issues you don't fully understand, and now outside people are involved. That's not stable. Stable. There it was. Not confusion. Not yet. The setup for it. Lorene felt the whole shape of his thinking in that instant. Not because he said too much. Because he said exactly enough. He was not here to shout. He was not here to apologize. He was here to establish a story. One calm sentence at a time. Before taking it somewhere formal. A woman her age. Isolated. Overwhelmed. Influenced. She could almost hear it written down. "You should go," she said. Mitch blinked. "Mom, you should go before you say the next thing." He stared at her then. Really stared. As if trying to find the version of her that still explained herself too much. The one who filled silence for other people. Smoothed over sharp corners. Left room for them to stay comfortable, even while stepping on her. That woman was not standing in the doorway. Mitch saw it. And hated it. He took a breath through his nose. Gave one short nod. Then, looked down at the box near the wall. "What's in there?" Lorene did not follow his eyes. Enough. Something changed in his face at that word. Not anger exactly. Something cleaner, colder. The look of a man realizing he was later to the truth than he meant to be. He stepped back from the porch without another argument. Went down the steps. Opened the car door. Then stopped with one hand on the frame and looked up at her. "If this gets out of hand," he said, "don't say I didn't try to help." Lorene waited until he pulled away before closing the door. Then she turned the deadbolt for the first time since arriving at the farm, carried the box into the bedroom, and, before the last of the daylight left the window, wrote 3 new words at the top of her legal pad. Get ahead first. Getting ahead first meant Lorene stopped reacting and started arranging. The next morning she was at Mr. Hodge's office before the courthouse clock struck 9, the box on the chair beside her. Her coat still carrying the cold from outside. She did not waste time with summary. She told him Mitch had come to the farm, told him about the truck at the eastern lane, told him Dana's questions had shifted from concern to information gathering. And when she reached the part where her son used the word stable, Mr. Hodge leaned back in his chair and went very still. "That's not family language anymore," he said. Lorene waited. "That's pre-legal language." The words landed cleanly. Not a surprise. Not after the porch. But hearing them spoken aloud changed the air in the room. It made the danger formal. "Mr." Hodge opened the box and began moving through the papers with a speed that told her he had already chosen a direction in his mind. Survey copies, tax notices, Vernon's note, the letter about informal access, the hardwood offer, her lists, her repair estimates, her call log. Lorene had not brought drama into that office. She had brought order. By noon, Mr. Hodge had done 3 things. He requested the full title packet and old survey references from the county. He sent for the tax payoff verification in writing. And he drafted a letter, brief, exact, and polite in the way sharp letters often are, stating that Lorene Haskins was represented in all matters relating to the Reddick farm and that any further inquiries should come through counsel. Lorene read it once. Then again, no swelling language, no outrage, just facts, clear lines, a boundary drawn in sentences. For the first time in weeks, something inside her settled lower in her chest. Not because the problem was over, because it had shape. Now. The next 2 days moved fast. The roofer came, walked the back slope, confirmed what she already feared and what she could still manage if she did not wait too long. The pump man came Friday and replaced less than she expected, which felt like a gift. Mr. Hodge called before supper with the first hard confirmation from the county. The eastern access reference still stood under the prior survey line. Not rumor, not memory, record. Record. Lorene wrote that word 3 times on her pad, then circled it once. That evening Dana called again. Lorene answered this time. There was no small talk, no weather, no soft entry. "Mitch got a letter from your lawyer," Dana said. "Yes." Pause. Then, quietly. "Was that necessary?" Lorene looked across the kitchen at the stacked files. The repaired pump receipt. The tax totals clipped in order. "Yes," she said. Dana's next breath shook a little. That was new. Not guilt exactly. Not yet, but strain. The first crack in the smooth arrangement her children had wrapped around themselves. Lorene heard it, and said nothing to ease it for her. Then Dana asked the one question that mattered most. "Mama, what did Daddy leave in that farm?" Lorene held the silence just long enough for the weight of it to register. Not what did Grandpa leave? Not what is the land worth? What did Daddy leave? That was the first honest question anybody in that family had asked in weeks. And it told Lorene something Mr. Hodges' letter had already begun to prove. Whatever had been hidden in that farm, whatever her father had protected so carefully, had finally become big enough to frighten the people who thought they understood her life. Lorene looked toward the eastern window, into the dark beyond it, and answered in the only way that still felt true. "More than you thought." And when Dana did not reply, Lorene understood the next part of the story had already begun. Dana did not call back that night. Neither did Mitch. The silence that followed was not empty, and it was not peaceful. It felt like the kind of silence that settles over a room after something heavy has finally been named. Not solved, not forgiven, just named. Lorene stood at the kitchen window for a long time after the call ended, one hand resting lightly on the sink, looking out toward the dark line of the eastern trees. In daylight, that side of the property still looked plain enough for strangers to misjudge. Brush, timber, narrow ground, nothing flashy, nothing eager to impress. That, she thought, was exactly how the most important things in a life often looked. Not obvious, not polished, not loud. Her father had known that. Vernon had never been a man for speeches. He did not sit people down and explain his love in full sentences. He fixed what broke. He kept what mattered. He waited longer than other people had patience for. And all those years Lorene had mistaken his silence for distance. He had been doing something far more difficult than talking. He had been preparing, not for money alone, for pressure, for greed, for the soft, familiar hands that reached for what they had not built. By the time the Eastern line was confirmed, the taxes arranged, and the title review locked into place, Lorene understood the farm was not just the last thing left in her name. It was the one thing her father had made hard to take. And maybe, she thought, that had been his apology. Not spoken, not sentimental, but solid. The first time Dana came back to the farm after that, she came alone. No folder, no careful speech, no pretense. She stood on the porch with both hands wrapped around herself and looked smaller than Lorene had ever seen her. Mitch did not come. Not then. Maybe not for a long while. Some kinds of shame take the shape of anger before they become anything useful. Lorene did not rush forgiveness. She did not offer easy comfort. But she opened the door. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, the house grew steadier. The roof was patched where it needed patching. The pump held. The files stayed locked. The eastern timber remained what it had always been. Not a miracle. Not a fantasy. But leverage, security, time, space to breathe without asking permission. And, for the first time in months, maybe years, Lorene no longer felt like a woman waiting to be handled. She felt like herself, not younger, not untouched, not suddenly free of pain, just herself. Standing on land everyone else had misread, with her name still holding where it mattered most. If this story stayed with you, leave a like so more people can find it. Subscribe if you believe some comebacks deserve to be witnessed all the way through, and tell me in the comments, if you were Lorene, would you have opened the door for Dana or left it closed?